Welcome to Blueprint Cymru, a podcast intended to champion New Wales, where we explore the solutions to how we, the citizens of Wales, can shape our nation's future. You can check out our Engine for Change, sponsor our work, or make suggestions for how to change Wales for the better by visiting our website, new.wales. In Blueprint Cymru, we bring together life experiences and perspectives of fascinating individuals who have a story and who have a vision for shaping Wales's future. My name is Simon Hobson. From a childhood spent on my Welsh grandparents' farm, life has taken me to France, where I was a professional cyclist, to becoming a mining engineer, starting cannabis and biotech business, and I do a bit of writing on the side. I am based in Montreal, in Quebec, and where I am chatting to today's guests. Our guest today is Brad Williams, who is a corporate consultant and professional boxing judge based in Dubai. He grew up in a council estate in Abergavenny, played rugby for Dragons Academy and Wales under-16 before he moved to London, Birmingham, back to Wales, Australia, and after travelling the world has settled for now in Dubai. Hello, Brad. Good to meet you.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Simon. Good to be with you. Thank you so much.
So before we started recording, we had a bit of a chat about your Guinness World Record attempt. Let's tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, really exciting. It's actually a second attempt. So I attempted first time last year, last March in Italy. So it's an attempt to cross Lake Garda in the fastest time via kayak. And unfortunately, as a novice kayaker, I got caught out by the weather first time round. So planning to go back in the summer with a bit of nicer weather, hopefully.
Yeah.
And this time to achieve the record. So been putting it together this week, actually, the team, because it does take a team to kind of achieve something like that. So it's a mix of guys from Wales and England. We'll be driving over via the Eurotunnel, so we're going to start the journey from Wales, and then early July, look to set out and get the record on a day there around the 6th or 7th of July. I've done a few projects. I tried to kind of encapsulate my passions and hobbies, so sport, travel, and also fundraising. So previously, I've climbed Kilimanjaro and raised money for Barnardo's. Also did a half marathon race for Barnardo's. And also I raised for Noah's Children's Ark, Noah's Hostel in Cardiff, Hospice, doing the 3 peaks in the UK. This time around, I chose another UK charity, Muslim Hands, which basically helped the effort on the ground for orphans in the Middle East, across the MENA region. So typically orphans that are in countries where there's been conflict or natural disasters. And so raised a lot of money from the first attempt, and this time kind of just focusing on hopefully achieving the Guinness World Record. Yeah.
Well, that sounds pretty exciting. How's the training going for that?
Yeah, look, it's I'm in Dubai, as you said, and it's a good time of year, nice weather. It's kind of quiet in the city right now. It's Ramadan, so I'm trying to get out as much as I can on the water. Couple of hours a week, also with the kind of usual gym and running kind of regime. So feeling good, but I don't want to jinx anything. Obviously, I felt good last time. I just hope this time, like I said, is a bit better weather. My paddle also snapped, so I had a carbon fiber paddle. And about an hour and a half, 2 hours into the challenge, it kind of snapped in half, which gives you an idea of the kind of the water that I was in. So if I can just get some calm water, I think, feeling very positive about it this time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I hope that goes as you want it to. So perhaps you could, you grew up in Abergavenny in a council estate, so perhaps you could tell us a little bit about that experience of where you grew up and where you come from, parents, etc.
Yeah, Abergavenny's hometown. Absolutely loved growing up there. It's a market town, very rural kind of place. It's surrounded by 7 hills. Very beautiful place to visit in the summer. That's probably where my love of the outdoors comes from. I grew up there in the 90s, so before the kind of social media and internet age, so there wasn't kind of any of those options at the time. My family background, I grew up with two sisters. I never met my father. My father was incarcerated at an early age, so I never got a chance to meet him. All I know is that he was a very, very handsome guy, so I got some reward for that.
Clearly, yeah.
Yeah. And so, early memories was kind of, we were pretty much on the breadline there in Wales. It's tough, wasn't an affluent family at all. Got by with the kind of single income. My mother was a freelance hairdresser. And then about the age of 8 years old, there was an incident which resulted in kind of being put into social care. So I spent then the next 4 or 5 years in and out of kind of foster care and orphanages. And then my grandparents kind of raised me from my teenage years onwards. And my grandfather was from Abergavenny, from the steelworks industry, and then worked in education as a technician. And my grandmother was a long time servant of the NHS, really. She was a nurse, spent 30, 40 years there. My childhood memories, really, I remember a lot of positivity around technology. There was just times where there was just waves of technology. We went from having a landline on a cord to having, the first mobile phone. I remember the Motorola with the big aerial, like a house brick in your pocket. £10 of credit will last you 2 or 3 months. I can remember, not having a computer to go into having a hard drive in the house and then a floppy disk, USB, and so it was a good time to kind of be growing up, seeing this kind of new wave of technology. And then obviously being in Wales, it was just rugby mad. I mean, I was playing rugby 5 or 6 times a week. Just started the kind of new golden age of Welsh rugby, where 2005. We all remember where we were when Gavin Henson kicks that kick. And it started a kind of couple of decades of success. And being in school at that age was great because it kind of gave you confidence to go out and that we were good and we could do something similar. So that was kind of my childhood environment, and really enjoyed it. And I'm really glad I grew up there. Now I've got a young daughter here in Dubai. It's nice seeing her grow up here, but I do think about the things that she might miss out on living in such a rural place in Wales.
Absolutely. So are there any memories from that experience that really define Wales for you, or how you perceive the nation?
I can't really think of anything in particular, but I would just say that, Wales then was just a very good community place. People were aware of my situation. I had a lot of help. Sometimes it might be something as small as a kind word. It might be, I remember lots of times going into shops, having not had the right amount of money. I learned to count from 1 to 10 in school. I learned to count from 11 to 100 using copper coins. And sometimes I got it wrong. I wouldn't have quite enough money.
The 1 penny sweets.
Yeah, enough Freddos and chocolate bars and packs of crisps and stuff. But people would you get to the counter and people would check it out for you, right? So I always had that kind of generosity. People were always as friendly as they could be, and they weren't always in the best situation either. So it was kind of that coming together of community. That's how I kind of remember Wales, and rugby being the heart of it. I've had friends and family. For people and listeners that are from other parts of the world, to try and understand, rugby, it's probably the closest thing to religion we have in Wales. I've, like I said, friends and family who's had a baby and the christening, and then the ceremony afterwards is in the rugby club. They get married, the after parties in the rugby club. There's a funeral, someone passes away, the wakes in the rugby club. So it's kind of like cradle to the grave. And even your small communities, towns of 10,000 people or less, got that. So that's how I remember Wales. And it's interesting because I'm in my 30s now, and I've lived outside of Wales for 13 years. So there'll be potentially a point in my life where I've lived outside of Wales more than I've lived in But I still see it as home, and go back as much as I can.
So do you think it was that imbued culture that saw you play rugby to an international standard then? Was there no other option for you at the time?
Yeah, no, you're right. I think I was very lucky that my physique was suited to rugby. I was big and strong, and I didn't really have any fear of taking the ball into contact. And I just remember, as young kids, anyone that knows rugby, you have four options when there's a penalty, and one of the options is to tap and go and run kind of directly at the opposition. And usually, I would be volunteered to do that, or on the receiving end and put my shoulder in. And yeah, I just had no fear, and just that kind of that built a lot of self-esteem for me. It built confidence, built values, friends. When you're in that situation of the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder, there's a lot of kind of you question yourself a lot. What can I do? I mean, what am I capable of? And being in a team environment, a lot of people would actually at that stage believe in me more than I would myself. They would put me in a team, they would select me, friends would kind of champion me to do something. And so I didn't really have many pathways naturally, because my family situation, it wasn't like I was going to be a certain career or going to inherit anything. None of my family had been to higher education, so that wasn't even on my radar whatsoever. But because of the national game in Wales, when I started rugby, Wales had hosted the Rugby World Cup in 1999. I remember meeting Ian Evans, who I didn't really even know at the time. I just knew that Cornell, Rob Howley, Neil Jenkins, they were kind of big players, and they visited the town and stuff, and it just it brought me in. It brought me into that community, and gave me a kind of a starting point. And look, like a lot of young people around the world, it kept me out of trouble. I was basically, all the hours outside of school, I was playing rugby, and if I hadn't been, I would definitely have been up to no good. So, that was my starting block, and then to be selected for Wales was just, again, massive pride, massive self-esteem. I really played Wales for that, the goal. Most Welsh people look to represent the national team, but it was also, for me, it was just trying to bring some honour to my family name, and respect amongst peers. And everyone loves rugby in Wales, and most people play at least club and school rugby to a certain level. So they understand, they know how tough it is, and if you can stay in that arena for a period of time, it shows character, and people understand that. So the whole kind of being in a small town, being the son of someone that was incarcerated, to then being someone that was representing the town and the school, on the national stage, international stage, everything changed for me. Like, people would come up to me in the streets and kind of ask me how I'm going. People would come watch me training. People that I wasn't even friendly with, but they just knew, they had heard of me, and they from the same town, from the same council estate. I'd be doing sprints in the rain and the snow, and getting myself fit, and people just come and watch you, just because they thought, okay, this guy might make it. So all that kind of it just gave me a different level of confidence, self-esteem, how you perceive yourself. So really important for kind of for moving forward in life.
Absolutely, yeah. That sounds, it's a lot to take on at a young age. That sort of dedication to training. So the community in your family, were you Welsh speaking or?
No, and that's pretty normal, I suppose, with the part of Wales we're from. The county, obviously, Monmouthshire, Abergavenny, and then my grandparents, like I said, Ebervale, Blaen and Gwent. We were always encouraged with the language, in terms of I could probably sing more songs than what I could talk. The anthem and Sothon and Carol. So that was always part. I mean, St. David's Day we always celebrated. But at school we were kind of, it was minimum hours, right? We were looking at probably 2-3 hours a week. It was never enough to be able to have a conversation. And then outside the classroom, The language was really used. Of course, you've got S4C and the chat and the broadcasting there, but not something that is very common. I think attitudes have changed in terms of it's more and more in the education system. People are more proud of it and more aware of it. Looking at other options outside. You've got applications like Duolingo. I think also, as I've grown up and traveled the world, been to 50-something countries, lived in London, lived in Australia. For some reason, Welsh just seems to be a popular language to learn. A lot of linguists, they enjoy that sound and the kind of history of it being a very old Celtic language. Look, it's on my to-do list to kind of pick it up. I'm not the best. I could probably say hello, how are you in 8 languages, but after that, I struggle. Yeah.
Likewise, obviously being here in Quebec, it's French speaking. So, the people here, it's often just trying to make people aware of Wales and Wales' existence and the fact that it's got its own language. So you are in Dubai, and tell me a little bit about what happened to make you think you needed to leave Wales.
Yeah, well, interesting. Look, so at 13, and this is kind of a couple of years, I was selected for Wales national team at 15, and that's when I'd say my life really turned around. So 2 years before that, it was pretty daunting, where I was going to go next. I was surrounded by crime, I was in poverty, and there was no real clear pathway. 3 things that I had at that time were posters. One was a map of the world, one was a map of the UK, and one was a map which basically showed all the flags of the world. And I just kind of got fixated on that in terms of something to learn. And I would just look at, all the different continents and countries and start to learn the capitals. And being in a small town, kind of all the talk is, very inward and, who's the toughest guy around town, who's the richest, who's the prettiest. And none of those were me, obviously, at the time. But I kind of used to look at that map and think, well, is there more out there to look at and to learn and to see? And Abergavenny obviously wasn't even on the map. Wales was, the size of your thumbnail. And so that was in my mind. When I came into that setup then, I signed a contract, Dragons Academy. It was an EU-funded contract. Actually, EU paid for that. And essentially then they were looking at options at that time in Welsh rugby. It was, go and do a season in Australia or New Zealand, cut your teeth, go and learn from some of the best players around the world. Quite arrogantly at that time, Welsh rugby, we looked at England, Ireland, France, and we thought, they're all a bit soft. We're not going to learn anything from them. No point training over there. Go to the Southern Hemisphere and come back better. So they would send you out for a year, Australia, New Zealand, and I was kind of building up to that. I then kind of got cut from the academy a couple of years in. So I was still kind of around the squad, but I wasn't necessarily on that pathway. And kind of reality hit then in terms of, okay, I might actually have to get a job. I might not make a professional athlete. It's right. As you know, in professional sport, it's very tough. It's the top 1%. You can be very, very good and just not make it.
Yeah, many have had those experiences.
Yeah. And so there was 2 people really that I kind of consulted with. I had a careers advisor, and this must have been around 2007, 2008. Obviously, there was a global recession, crisis. And he said to me, look, he went through kind of my estimated grades. I wasn't very academic. I was looking at, D's and C's at GCSE level. And he just said to me, look, you don't need to be the smartest guy, but he said, I would advise you to hold on and basically stay in education for as long as you can, because he said, I'm a careers advisor. I'm covering the county. There's more than 1,000 kids going to leave school every year. And at the moment, there is like, whatever he said, 10, 20,000 people looking for jobs just in this part of Wales. And you're going to enter the market and there's no workaround. So once that had kind of taken its course, I looked at the pathway then to stay into higher education, and options came up. I mean, I considered Cardiff, Swansea, and then my issue obviously was finances. There was a form to fill out, means tested, and my kind of there was actually 4 of us I can remember from the whole school, and basically there was 0 funds attached to our name, and they then looked at kind of alternates, and those alternates were things like joining the army. I consider that, but again, that had been travelling away outside of Wales. I was deterred to do that then from family. And then a social worker, a guy called John George, who worked for Monmouthshire County Council, he kind of stepped in and said, look, there is a way to get funding here because of the kind of low household income. And then I was sponsored essentially, and my university was paid for. I still had to obviously pay my living costs and expenses, but like most students, I had a loan, and then that kind of really opened the door. And then when it comes to selecting universities, I didn't have lots of choice because, like I said, my academic background wasn't so strong. I was probably average at best. And at that stage, really, in Wales, obviously, it's quite limited in terms of you've got Cardiff, Swansea. And I just thought to myself, where would be the best place to come out on the back of what the careers advisor told me? 3 years' time, where would I most likely find work? And then I was just drawn to London as the biggest city in Europe. I just looked at it and thought, there's people there from all over the world. There's opportunities, many different sectors, and it's growing. It kind of has its own economy, and that's why I decided there. So that was my kind of first journey out of Wales, really, to live. I just turned 18 and moved into central London, which was pretty rock and roll,
Got a big step to take at 18 years of age.
Yeah, it was great. Like looking back, I mean, I had a very, very strong Welsh accent at the time, and most people could understand me. I had to adapt, I had to evolve, I had to tone it down a bit, water it down, and it was just fantastic. I was in kind of zone 2, zone 1. But essentially, I was very close to the campus was close to the Emirates, the Arsenal football stadium. So it was a football heartland, being a rugby guy. So it was kind of very strange going from somewhere where they love rugby, everyone understands it. A lot of people don't even know what it is. So it was good cultural experience. I was the only white guy on the course that I did. It was about 80 people. I did sociology as an undergrad, social sciences. And so I had a massive education outside the classroom. That's what I can say. It's, what I learned kind of in lectures was fairly limited. And as you know, in higher education, a lot of it is, your own research, your own kind of will to find out information that you want to then put in a dissertation. It's not like, classroom syllabus. So, yeah, it was a great experience. And that was then those 3 years, again, my confidence built, and I just had a different kind of view of the world from there, really.
And how did you get from there to, where you're sat talking to me now?
Yeah, well, long story short, I mean, I met my now wife in the gym in London. She approached me first, so before anyone asks. But I was in London then for 5 years. So I had 3 years as a student. I started my career there, worked for 2 years. And then I backpacked, I traveled a bit. I had my long distance relationship with my wife. And then essentially coming back to the UK, I was then looking at, okay, could I work in Brazil, where my wife's from, or could she work here? There wasn't really those opportunities. And I remember then being in Wales, so I'd come back to Wales. I was lucky that I'd found a job. But the job that I had, along with another 2 part-time jobs, it really wasn't enough to kind of sustain myself. So I worked it out that as a manager working in Cardiff, I would have to work 4 hours before I'd break even. So just on fuel alone, And that was the problem for me. The more and more work I was doing, the more and more driving I was doing, and I obviously lived in a rural place. So economically, then we just looked at Australia. We went there for a couple of years, and then because Australia has a very kind of complex route to citizenship and residency, we just considered Asia as a place where it's very old school. You get a job, you get a visa, and generally speaking, good place to earn, high income, lower taxes, very safe places to live. But we were open to anywhere. We applied Singapore, Hong Kong, Bahrain, Oman, Taiwan, and just ended up in Dubai. Got an offer. Was here through COVID. Obviously, COVID hit here like everywhere else. But the way that the kind of government dealt with that, and compared to what I kind of saw and felt and heard from the UK, we were just very glad we were here. And now it's home. We've got a 7-month-old baby. We've got a property here. And yeah, just enjoy life generally. It's just a very good place to be in terms of career opportunities, business opportunities, networking. We still travel a lot. Last year I went to 11 countries because it's so connected here. Yeah, just a great place to be.
Yeah. Well, of course, COVID that you mentioned there was probably an occasion where a lot of people who were in Wales realised that the Senedd existed and it had some powers. So do you think that the Welsh government, or indeed the UK government, could have done more to keep you and could be doing more to keep people like you there in Wales? And
yeah, it's interesting. I think in terms of economic opportunities, absolutely. The panic for me was that it was almost planning ahead. Where would I find that job? And even when I had gone to London, got a degree, had a few years work experience, then I had a master's degree in business also. Even then, I was very lucky. I mean, I basically got taken on a grad scheme from a large American automotive company. But if I take that away, I mean, I'd applied at the time for hundreds and thousands of vacancies, but it's very tough, right? And salary wise, minimum wage and the actual opportunity to earn money where you could then build something, whether that's buying a home or savings plan, retirement plans, things like that in the future. I didn't see it as available. Most of the people that I know that are doing well in Wales are entrepreneurs. And it's no one's fault, but there are lots of people that have worked hard to get themselves into a middle management position, whether it's private sector, public sector. And like I said, cost of living, it's just not enough. But also mobility. I was talented, and I was aware of that, and I was aware I could do more. But the problem is that you're in companies where people are just looking to just sit tight and build their pension, and they don't want to leave their post. They're also worried that they won't find something. So yeah, you don't get that chance to step up and use your full range of skills. Whereas a place like this, I mean, to give you some kind of context, I was here for 2 weeks when I first came. I had like 12 job interviews in that 2 weeks. So I was spoiled for choice, right? And it was all different industries. I mean, I've worked because I traveled and I've worked abroad. I mean, I've been in agriculture, security, automotive, aviation, education, tech. So I've just had maybe an unusual career path. It's definitely not a textbook one. But I've just had so much exposure to being in decision-making roles and different industries that, yeah, I'm not sure that, yeah, I think it would always be difficult potentially to mirror that in Wales as it stands. Yeah.
So do you think that with the tradition of sort of Wales voting on bloc for the Labour government and Labour both in the Senedd and Westminster, Labour's obviously sort of tacking a bit to the right now and seemingly continuing the austerity measures of the previous Conservative government. In your experience being in Dubai and other places of the world, do you have any thoughts on where Wales could go? Is there an alternative route to this sort of traditional way of managing the economy and helping create jobs, or maybe in the case of Wales, not creating the jobs as you just outlined?
Yeah. Well, look, just on the first part of that, I mean, I was back home for the general election, and I open to say I voted for Cymru. My constituent, or my county, Monmouthshire, had been Tory for a long time. There's a lot of farming communities there, and traditionally they had gone that route. That was a bit of a stronghold. And you're right, South Wales there in the valleys, where my family's from, was always Labour. And the reason, or the feeling I would get from people, is that was just purely that, at that time, 20, 30, 40 years ago, you had the Thatcher kind of regime, and cutting of jobs and closing of mines and steelworks. And so they could never, ever, ever consider Tory. I mean, Labour was the only opposition at that time, and they were always going to stick to that. And Wales has been a socialist place. You had Abergavenny and, founded the NHS. So people are kind of still very passionate about, helping each other, the people of Wales, that everyone should have, fair treatment and cover, whether it's education or health. So I feel like a lot of places that have traditionally been Labour, from my perspective, that's the reason. It's still a protest against, what happened there in the 80s. I mean, look, in fairness to the Welsh people, I think they did the right thing, and overall in the last election, in terms of their goal, it seemed, and a lot of places' goal was to get the Tories out. And as you know, as of today, after the general election, there is no Tory seat. So, you could sense that was coming. And I think, if you give them the benefit of the doubt, the people of Wales, that was the kind of methodology that they applied. From here on in, it's interesting, because you would think that with a Labour government in Westminster and in the Senate with such control, that there would at least be, some announcements and PR, some positivity around where are we going next, where's the vision, what was the value of that vote. From my perspective, I mean, look, I'm not there on the ground every day, but I keep up to date with kind of current affairs, politics, with what I do. I mean, I need to know this stuff. I mean, I'm meeting business owners, investors, high net worth individuals from all over the world, and obviously the UK always plays a role in global politics, as other countries. So I'm fairly up to date. I work with the embassy here as well. The British government here. So we always kind of talk informally about these things. And yeah, there just seems to be no sense really of leadership or any real change. It just seems to be very kind of slow, status quo politics. Looking at very, very minute issues, nothing that's going to revolutionize or change people's experience on the whole. For me, I mean, I've always been a believer in independence. Most of that comes from my experience of travel. Growing up in Wales, you're kind of told that, number one, you're too small, and number two, there's no money. Well, on the first one, I can tell you that I visited many, many, many small countries, much more than Wales by population. There's countries I've been to which you could drive around in an hour, and they are not asking for anyone to, look after them or take control. It's quite the opposite. They're very well governed. There's a clear strategy. They've got a seat at the table, and generally speaking, people are happy there. There's pride, as there always is in people from small countries. So I don't believe that from what I've seen, and I also always think that if someone said to you, "There's two jobs on offer," and you want to take the easy job, the Prime Minister of New Zealand or the President of India or China, the easy job there is New Zealand, right? To govern 1 billion people is always going to be more challenges than 5 million New Zealand. So I see a lot of advantages to small countries, and I think Wales could take advantage of that. on the economic side of things, the problem is right now is that we don't have any control on legislation. So if we want to consider changing something, a system, a policy, for our advantage, we don't really have that authority to do it, and we're kind of stale and stuck where we are. If someone looks at the British Isles, you've got a great example there of the Isle of Man, and with what I do, I mean, I meet people, like I said, all over the world. They have assets, they have wealth, and they would use that jurisdiction as an investment opportunity to be tax efficient, to be safe, to save their assets. And Isle of Man, it's had 32 years of economic growth. It was a kind of no one knew island. No one had heard of it. No one had really looked at it. Its economy was based on fishing, hospitality. Isle of Man TT, one event a year. And the leadership there, because they could change legislation and have that opportunity, they essentially just had a strategy of, let's target a few industries, and let's make ourselves appealing. And so,
well, one of the founding members of New Wales, she spent her childhood on the Isle of Man, so she always sings glowingly of the place for its ability to do politics more effectively.
Absolutely, but it just shows you that the size is not a stopper. That's a great example, and and it's also a great example that we don't need to do anything really radical. It's just common sense. You just need to think. The industries that Isle of Man looked at really were banking, finance, and tech, right? Which traditionally, again, I mean, they're very robust industries. Even during COVID, were least impacted. So, could you apply that to a place like Anglesey in Wales? Could you have an offshore banking system, an offshore jurisdiction there, where you just appeal to that market? In an independent Wales, you certainly could. I mean, you could start designing that now, and you could implement it very, very quickly. The right people, the right leadership, and straight away, then you're creating a pathway for people. You're creating industries, you're creating jobs, but also jobs that are sustainable with good income. They're industries that are always going to do well. So that's the kind of legacy I think Wales needs to look at.
And how do you envision shaping, if you were to take Anglesey as an example, setting that up as a banking hub? How would, as obviously the name of this podcast is Blueprint Cymru, what would you need to make that happen as far as personnel? Is there, there's obviously around about 3 million, I think, Welsh diaspora out there in the world, and we'd obviously have to bring some of those people back into Wales. What sort of measures could we put in place, in your view, that would encourage people to go back to Wales? What sort of individuals would we want to come to Wales, and how would we encourage that and make it easier for people?
Yeah, look, interesting. Look, on Welsh diaspora, look, there was a recent study done. It was titled "The Brain Drain of Wales." They identified 3 to 4 million people with Welsh diaspora living outside of Wales, spread across, Europe, North America, and further afield. 95% of those people are, degree qualified in high-paying jobs across lots of sectors, including professional services, banking, and finance. So, do you have Welsh people that are already kind of qualified and experts in the field overseas? Yes, but potentially as well. There are so many other countries you look at for best practice outside of the traditional systems in the UK, and obviously Switzerland is a famous one in terms of again another small country that's kind of gone its own way, always stay neutral, not part of the EU, and just made a name for itself in a couple of key industries, and kind of reaps the rewards of that. When you go to Switzerland, very well organized. People are generally happy. Less socioeconomic issues. Would probably be a top performer in most metrics, in the continent of Europe. So I think that the best thing for Wales to do is to, start from scratch and, really map that blueprint out in terms of where to draw the experts from. You can draw them from Wales potentially. There's been some good steps with the new Development Bank of Wales. I think Bank Cymru is also in design, so there is kind of some stuff in the pipeline that's going on at least. But I think you've also got the Welsh diaspora and other people. Where I work in the UAE, 2001 they opened their first free zone. A free zone, just for people to understand the concept, is essentially a zone for setting up a business and doing business, which allows you to be tax domiciled in that country, but doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing inbound services. So, if you set up in Isle of Man, doesn't mean you're just setting up to serve the Isle of Man populace. You're potentially doing something then outside the country, offshore. As I'm talking to you today, and this is obviously the sector I work in, I mean, there are now 46 free zones. So in 24 years, the UAE's decided to add another 45 free zones because there is such a volume of business. A lot of that was...
How does that well, one, how does that benefit UAE, but also how does it not detract from mainland jobs? If there's areas which have got tax efficiency or favourable conditions for companies, how does that spill over into the more general economy rather than everyone just piling into those free zones and the rest of a nation drying up for work and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, well, on the first part of that, so essentially it's like I said, I mean, the big draw for companies would be initially was tax, right? So you're basically going into a jurisdiction. You're not necessarily reinventing a wheel. You're copying and pasting a business that you could have in another country, US, UK, wherever, but you're just headquartering, tax domiciling it in the UAE. So you've got that instant kind of tax benefit. Obviously, as well, then there's the logistical side. Where is it placed? What other markets can you serve? So there's an element of doing business in a certain region, in the MENA region. So, from a Welsh point of view, you would look at, okay, how could one of these free ports then increase the volume of business around Europe? So, you would want to position something usually attached to government infrastructure, such as an airport or seaport. Most free zones are conditioned in that way. When it then comes to, not or sort of ensuring that it doesn't affect kind of what happens in the mainland. Essentially, in the UAE, that wasn't an issue because tax was the same for all companies. It was just that jurisdiction would just appeal so much more because you didn't have to back then. You didn't have to have engagements with any kind of local. You could be completely foreign owned. You could set up as an LLC, which you're familiar with in a country. So the legal form was very similar.
So in the UAE, just if one was to establish a company and outside of the free zone, you'd have to have a local partner. Is that correct?
Historically, it's changed now. But when we're talking, the journey from 2001, the first free zone opened, yes. So you were going into the free zone as I said to kind of control or own all the shares, how the business there. So that was a trade-off why you'd go into a free zone. But generally speaking, I mean, you can design something where across the board there's no downside. I mean, in the UAE, why people also work here is because your employer is also sponsoring you. It's built into labor law. They are granting you the right to work. They're responsible for that cost. On the medical and healthcare side of it as well, there is no public health here, so you cannot just go into hospital and get free service, but your employer is responsible for providing you with a medical insurance. So, and I mean, all the hundreds of companies that I've set up and spoke to, that's never been a issue of contention, right? Companies are happy that they've got a very, very low or zero tax bill. And then at the same time, built into employee benefits is, okay, I know this person and their family is going to be, have world-class healthcare. So
to take that forward in Wales, obviously for many natural reasons, and also obviously the pride of the history of the National Health Service being associated with Wales, there's a big mindset and a big cultural change that would be needed to take society in Wales towards something that you're discussing now. So, and do you see that could be a reality? I mean, I know that the free ports, there's conversation and sort of rudimentary planning of Anglesey and I think southern Port Talbot area becoming free ports, which I believe the previous Conservative government brought in as a concept.
Yes,
So, how does that fit? Whilst as we talk about the blueprint, you can have a blueprint, and then when you actually come to instigating it, the realities of politics or the realities of community responses and emotions come into play. And how do you see approaching that?
Absolutely. Look, I think in terms of the free ports, happy to see that at least that there's that conversation, because as we said, since the general election, what announcements have been made, what vision is there? At least there are some projects that are being considered. So you're at that stage of it. From my point of view, I don't see how they become hubs, world class and competitive, without some at least changes to the tax legislation. Because if I'm a business and I'm choosing between Ireland or Isle of Man or Malta or Cyprus or Port Talbot, I mean, from my experience, in most cases, tax is going to be one of the biggest considerations. Obviously, there's cost of setup, there's time taken, there is the reputation, the community, logistics. Where will you get your talent from? If you need people on the ground, if you need human resources. But generally speaking, I mean, 7 times out of 10, tax is going to take the kind of forefront of that conversation. So I don't see how the free ports, become what they can be, optimized without some changes there. But in terms of systems that are in place and have been in place for a long time in Wales, and I think it's all part of the same conversation. You need to consider, what is the best way, and how do you fix problems that haven't been fixed. I mean, when I tune into Question Time, on the BBC, I see the same questions and the same answers getting put forward from 10 years ago. I mean, if someone goes back and replays, from 2015 Question Time.
Absolutely, that was the motivation behind us starting New Wales. Let's stop repeating the same questions, and if we are, let's find some different answers to them.
Yeah, and so, and that's the problem. I think a lot of the debate in the British Isles, and especially in Wales, is always inward looking. It's like, how can we solve this problem thinking the way that we've always thought? Whereas the reality of it is, I mean, you look at the countries around the world, 65 countries have become independent of the United Kingdom, right? So there's many, many systems. I mean, here it's very hybrid. You've got 10 million population. Only 1 million of that are actually nationals. So they hold a UAE passport, so they're Emirati. So actually they're a minority in their own country. 9 million are foreign expats like me. And there's a very different feeling towards foreign nationals here. It's
well, I was going to interject and say, given for the particularly valleys, Abergavenny, where you're from, there's apparently a surge in support for Reform UK, and obviously one of their key political motivations and selling points to many is the anti-immigrant, and it's all everyone else's fault. What you're describing and how you're envisioning sort of the blueprint Cymru very much relies on being open to the world and being part of that global system. So how would that interact, and how would you go about selling that concept to a Welsh populace that is often inwardly looking and very protectionist of that community vibe and feels the outsider putting pressure on that?
Well, look, I liken it a little bit. When I look at this issue, I mean, I know so there's legal and illegal migration, right? The illegal migration, I look at it a little bit like the space race. You know, when you had the Russians and NASA, and I think NASA spent like 10 billion trying to design a pen that could write in space because the ink kept running off the page because of gravity, and the Russians took a pencil, right? That's the way I look at it, right? Here we're in the Arabian Gulf. You know, a lot of people would say UAE, Dubai, the best city in the world, best country in the world. A lot of people want to be here. They don't have any illegal migration issues, and it's not like a heavily militarized place with borders. I mean, actually, quite the opposite. There's a very low police presence here. But what stops people? I mean, you've got Iran across the water. You know, you could take a small boat across Iran, similar to what you could do from Calais to Dover. And then you've also got the subcontinent of India and lots of other countries there, which is, you know, got its own issues, poverty and etc. Right? But it just doesn't exist here. The reason being is that to get access to services, you know, you have to produce an ID card. That ID card has gone through security, immigration, and biometrics, fingerprinting, and a blood test.
Hi, Red. Welcome back from our little break. So we were talking about innovation and the lack of it from governments of all colours. One of the areas that I think Wales has been let down on most recently is the failure of the government in Westminster to support the devolution of the Crown estates to the Senedd in Wales and give people the control and right over the revenues coming out of those Crown estates, which obviously are growing in considerable amounts every year as we embrace the green tech revolution, offshore wind, tidal, etc. And I think one of the ways that that money could be used to utilize to help the people of Wales would be to bring that into a sovereign wealth fund. Wales has many other resources, and lots of rich nations that are rich in resources, such as Norway and where you are, UAE, have their own sovereign wealth funds, but also China and Kuwait, Singapore. So, do you have any thoughts on whether Wales should have a sovereign wealth fund, or how that could work? What that money could be spent on, invested in?
Yeah, look, I think Wales, where it's at in the current institution that it's part of, it needs to be performing better. It's very obvious. I mean, I think if you look at Wales and you compare it to other parts of Europe, Western Europe, it just doesn't perform well enough. And so something like that could transform the performance. So absolutely. I live in a region where it's very rich in natural resources. All the Gulf states, the GCC, are rich from oil and gas. But none of those states are kind of resting on their laurels. They are very shrewd. They're very clever. They will basically, plan, how they're going to diversify their economy. And in the case of the UAE and now Saudi Arabia also, they've been very successful at it. They are using those natural resources to build infrastructure, whether that's roads, rail, airports, and then subsequently branch out into events, hospitality, entertainment. So if they ever reach a point where those resources are no longer available, they will have at least another 5 or 6 or 7 industries that they can rely on. And by doing that, they're also simultaneously building a brand. I also work in professional boxing. I cover the UAE and Saudi for professional fights. And if anyone's a boxing fan, I mean, the amount of kind of events that's been put on in the last few years, and it's world class. I mean, you're talking about Hollywood star production with the biggest names, and there's a lot of investment in sport as well. Generally, you've got the likes of Ronaldo and Neymar now playing in Saudi Arabia, so it's joined up thinking. It's about how can I take what I've got, a resource, and and then diversify it as much as possible into other areas. And I think absolutely Wales, it's a small country, but again, so are lots of these places. The likes of Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar. I mean, you can drive around the whole country in a couple of hours. So they're actually smaller than Wales. Generally on the infrastructure, I think what springs to my mind is as someone that lives abroad and has lived abroad for 13 years and traveled to 50-something countries, I never see Wales promoted. There is some very kind of high-level campaigns that I come across, which is basically UK, Great Britain, and it's typically around London. I've looked at, the public data in terms of where the budget gets spent, and most of it is on London, the vast majority, more than 80%. So, some of that is also building a brand and promoting, other things. There's also reports. Spain is a great example. British holidaymakers were going there in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. By the 90s and 2000s, they're buying houses, they're getting passports, they are opening businesses. So if you can invite people into a country and make it a destination, you can secure their investment. There's a very clear pattern of investment there.
Sorry to interrupt you. I should think that I've read recently that Wales has potential for promoting itself for eco-tourism, particularly with its famous green hills. There's something there that's almost a novelty to particularly people from the Middle East, as far as seeing luscious hills and sheep grazing, and that could play in very well. But of course, you also mentioned about driving around these countries, and one of the issues with Wales is that it's very difficult to get from north to south. Everything's set up, drive east to west, and it's all very small roads.
Yeah, again, common sense. I mean, there's a country here, UAE. I mean, the 7 Emirates. It's not that much bigger. I mean, essentially, they have one highway that runs north to south, and it goes through all Emirates. They're bringing rail in across the GCC. A lot of it's down in terms of commercial track for moving freight. Passenger trains are coming in soon as well. So, if you don't move forward, you end up being behind. And so that's where Wales is, I think. I mean, not have a road between Cardiff and Wrexham, or Cardiff and the north. I mean, for me, it's criminal. I mean, it's a very simple thing, but it allows people to also then spend money in Wales. There are lots of very, very passionate Welsh people that I know in South Wales that have really ventured north. I mean, I used to go once a year. I love Snowdon. I love the national park. I love the coastline. Same in West Wales, Tenby. And I agree, like Wales can be a world-class outdoors destination. Absolutely. I see lots of nice adverts of Dubrovnik in Croatia. The castle on the coast there. I've never seen one of Tenby. Right? You've got an old castle town there, and you've got the Welsh Riviera. You never see it. So,
perhaps we need to get it into more HBO productions, like Dubrovnik.
Yeah, or at least you have some airlines and you have some synergies and promotions. But like whenever I come back to the UK, even when I look to fly in directly, so I'm sometimes in a position where I can say, look, I will stop off somewhere, whether it's transit or whether it's for a few days, and then I'll fly into the UK. I mean, I usually fly to Birmingham. How many flights? How much money have I spent? Me as an individual. over the last, like I said, 15 years, it'd be a large amount. And then you times that by 3-4 million people that Welsh diaspora. We're just on that opportunity alone. Why do we have to fly to England to get to Wales? It's because Cardiff just is not good enough. Cardiff International Airport. A lot of airlines just will not operate there because the infrastructure is not right. Logistically, then it's a nightmare to get from Cardiff Airport into the main city centre. But these are things, and obviously, you're an engineer by background as well. I mean, these are things that can be designed, can be fixed, but we're just not seeing the vision of that, and the rhetoric from the leadership is not going that way. So, and look, funnily on branding, I get asked a lot now, is Wrexham the capital of Wales? Because you've had Ryan Reynolds, a Canadian national, who's bought a football club, and obviously he's a Hollywood star. He's got a big profile. But one Netflix documentary, it transforms a town that's been there for thousands of years into something that people want to go and see. I've met so many people who just say, look, I'm going to take a detour now to Wrexham just to take a selfie with the racecourse ground and have a pint in the pub, whatever it may be. And 3-4 years ago, they wouldn't have dreamt of doing that. So it just shows you, the power of branding. And again, we are way, way behind. Even, I don't want to talk about just the Gulf, because again, they are wealthy states in general, but even countries like Georgia, Armenia, that won their independence in 1991. I visited Armenia recently. I mean, the way they promote themselves, the way it's organized, the way there's a sense of direction, it is very, very different. And that when you arrive as a tourist, that you are basically being guided through, the key kind of attractions, and of course you will part with your money at some point, right? You might not pay for everything, you might not do every experience, but it's just marketing. It's that simple. I mean, it's and I know Wales has world-class marketeers. It's just that they're not in a position where they're able to promote Wales as a country. And look, we've got a big red dragon on the flag. We should be unmissable. No one should ever get us confused. So yeah, it's definitely an area to consider. Absolutely.
And yeah, and I think that the flag certainly got noticed in the more recent Football World Cup, didn't it? And people started to realise Wales existed, and it was a distinct entity outside of England with its own histories and language. Yeah. And part of that history of Wales is obviously its resources, and famously the coal. As a mine engineer, I find it very strange that the Welsh government doesn't look to that history. And you've got something called coal bed methane, because the coal beds still keep producing gases, even when they're not being mined for coal. That could be safely and environmentally taken up and used for energy. I think it was already touched on the wealth of energy and electricity that can come from Wales. I believe it's already a net exporter of electricity into England. There's so much there that could feed into that sovereign wealth fund that we mentioned earlier. And I suppose that also comes back to being a bit more entrepreneurial and I guess politically aggressive with Westminster, and saying, well, yes, you're welcome to it, but you can pay us for it.
Yeah. I mean, I totally echo. I mean, look, I'm not an expert in say mining and natural resources, but you've got to use what you've got, and you've got to then be able to sell it. And I think that's something that just Wales is not capable of doing right now. And again, to look at the system here, I mean, Wales with its socialist history, the nationals here, the 1 million nationals in the UAE, I mean, they are basically, free healthcare, free education. They never pay a bill. They're given a government job, which will be, way beyond what minimum wage would be in the UK. Talking probably somewhere close to 60,000 sterling a year. They'll be given, a house, and all that's paid for by the natural resources. So when you look at, again, the systems, I mean, we're very bottom up in the UK and Wales. I mean, essentially we're looking, okay, let's get the funds from the working class and then pass it up and then spend it on HS2 or Rwanda or, Crown Estate, and it goes somewhere, we don't even get to see it. Whereas here, it's actually, okay, you've got an absolute monarch that has absolute power, and is the rightful owner, legally of that wealth, but actually distributes it amongst the people. Okay, it's only 1 million people, so it's a small population to distribute it amongst, but just that premise, that attitude, I think just shows in some ways how archaic, the Westminster is, and its kind of sister institutions. So that's my thought on it. It's we're stuck at the moment. We are in a bottleneck, and it doesn't matter how you cut it. We're not going to drastically change people's lives, and surely that's the role of government, right? Is you can't fix everything, but you can give people opportunities so they can fix themselves. And I think most Welsh people would be happy with that. So yeah, that's my kind of the way I look at it, having been here and grown up in Wales.
Yeah, so it's really imbuing that environment of embracing the entrepreneurial spirit, and I know we touched on it a little bit already with regards to the Development Bank of Wales, but with your experience of living in Dubai, is public banking and credit creation, is that something that a national can go to and acquire, or do they not need to?
Even me, here actually, at a banking level, in terms of as an individual, an actual person, you want to get credit. If you're an employee, they'll of course do a credit check on you, but they will look more deeply into your employer. What's the history of the employer? So if you work for a reputable employer, that's been established for a number of years, essentially they will give you large sums of credit. We're talking, I would say 5 years of your annual salary as a lump sum on a personal loan. And you don't necessarily need to disclose the plans for that. There's no sense checking in terms of, it's just a trust that you're educated, you work for a good firm. We as a nation know that you need to invest. You can't just leave it in the bank because of, especially in COVID. I mean, you had deflation, then inflation, and here the real estate is off the charts in terms of the increases. So they know that you have to be able to diversify your portfolio and invest, and whether it's stock market, crypto, they're very open and friendly. So that attitude is absolutely built in here. So I would say it's the complete opposite of what I would experience in the UK. And again, there's rewards here for investing. You've got a 10-year golden visa. If you buy a property which is worth 2 million, even if it's mortgaged. So you don't have to actually front that much capital to get long-term security guarantee for you and your family, and even your parents. So you can even sponsor people outside of your direct family. You can hire a maid, a driver, and kind of people that would support that family unit. So it's great. And the economy is so booming here. I mean, I can say that in the role that I do, opening businesses for people, and of all sizes. I mean, I've represented national, international brands, down to entrepreneurs that are just starting, and it's very, very rare to see someone fail, because as long as you can just convey your message, you can market a product or a service, as long as you remain compliant and you kind of follow the line, the opportunity is so vast here that it's, I don't want to say it's impossible to fail, but it feels like that. And so people are happy to roll the dice because they've got faith in that system that actually rolling the dice, it's probably going to land in my favour. And I think that's a very different environment to the UK.
There's definitely, in my view, a need for as an individual that might be branded as an entrepreneur myself. I definitely think that's one of the reasons why I left Wales and why the UK is that lack of respect for having a go and failing and trying again. So, I mean, you have left Wales now, but obviously you want to have a positive impact on home nation in the future. And you've been good enough to give us some of your time this evening, and I'm conscious of it getting quite late for you there. But do you see yourself ever going back to Wales to start a business or mentoring people, perhaps even getting involved in politics and shaping a future government?
Yeah, well, I'm a big believer in writing things down. I have lots of lists all over the place. Some of them are emails, some of them my phone and notebooks. And a long time ago, I wrote down a dream job would actually be to be a mountain ranger or a national park ranger. So, because again, I love the outdoors, and I think nothing better than if you were strolling around Brecon Beacons or Snowdonia or one of the national parks in Wales. So I do think about it, obviously, because I help my clients with that on a daily basis in terms of planning their future, their wealth, their legacy, their family, their retirement. And so, yeah, look, I think for me, my duty as a Welshman that was taken out of poverty and given an opportunity in education to change my future, then I've got to give back. And the ideal scenario for me is seeing people not having to struggle and go through those same challenges. You know, realistically, something will always be there. There'll always be some challenges, but you know, the amount of opportunities just to be covered today and they're on the table. There's a plethora of chances there for the Welsh people, and that's what I want to see. And I want to see Welsh people. You know, when I think about the notable Welsh people in the world, you know, for me, the best singer ever is Tom Jones. The best actor ever is Anthony Hopkins. The best soccer player ever is Gareth Bale. I don't care about Ronaldo or Messi. You know, the best rugby players. We are world-class people, right? We perform. You know, when we get the chance, when we get the experience, we're right there. And you know, I just think that the majority of Welsh people don't get that chance. So it's about creating those opportunities, a different way of thinking, giving back, and for me, to be bluntly honest, I could not come back to a UK. I could not, especially in the way that it is right now and the direction that I see it and the leadership. Could I come back to an independent Wales? Absolutely. Will I come back at a critical mass to hopefully influence that? Absolutely. So I think it's a key time. I think some key historical things have happened in the last 10 years. You've had Brexit, you've had a Scottish referendum, you've had change of monarch, you've had COVID-19, you've had poor performances back to back of governments, you've had affirmation of illegal wars. You know, as I talked about earlier, I almost signed up, in the early 2000s, and I think Wales doesn't need to be part of that. Wales can have its own story and it can move on, and that's the positive side of why I would come back. Yeah.
So, what in an idealized world, where would you see Wales in, say, 20 years from now? As far as
I suppose ideally, we would dig a big trench and separate from the British mainland and swim to the Caribbean, and we could just enjoy the good weather. But I think the weather is the only thing we can change, right? I think you start from scratch and rewrite history. I think the future of Wales, it should be an independent nation. It should be a republic. It should take its seat at the table. Like I said, there's a lot of good people in Wales, a lot of talent, and that should come to the fore on the international scene, in politics and business. And we should be known. we should be unmistakable. Such a great history, such a great story. It always bemuses me, some of the historical things. They haven't made Hollywood movies, they haven't made books. So I just think, ideally for me, Wales has got its seat at the table. That's what I want to see, and in some ways it follows the trajectory of many other nations. If you look at the history of the world, as I mentioned earlier, 65 countries have won their independence just from the UK. There's another 50, 60 that have won their independence from other nations, and the majority of the time, that's they then get the chance to kind of be their own people and write their own story, and that's what I want to see for Wales.
Absolutely. So, yeah, well, thanks very much, Brad, for giving us this time, and good luck with the world record attempt. Is there a way that listeners can follow that attempt? Have you got?
Yeah, well, LinkedIn, Brad Williams, you can search for. You'll see me there, based in Dubai, and Instagram account, don't laugh, the Real Prince of Wales. So you can find me there. I actually put that name so no one could find me, but I've just defeated.
I'm sure our listener will.
Yeah,
well, Jochen Var, thanks for being our first guest on Blueprint Cymru. So if, listener, you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to wherever you found it, and stay tuned for more conversations, into deeper aspects of the future of Wales, how we can shape it in a positive way. If you want to learn more about New Wales, please go to our website, which is new.wales. And thanks once again, Brad. All the best.
Thank you, Simon. All the best. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more conversations with people who want to build the future of Wales. And do go and find, like, and enjoy new.wales across all your favourite social media channels.